Hey crew, before we get started today, have you ever had one of those years? 2020 might be your opportunity to get started on one if you haven't. In the past 6 months, specifically in the last 3 months, it's been particularly difficult to produce this show. I was really sick just after New Year's. Might have been the coronavirus, we don't know, and that shot my voice for a while. The computer I bought to replace the Beast, the old computer that gave me so much trouble, has also started to give me trouble. So we've got a la bête deux situation going on. That's great. And because of coronavirus, many of the events that I had planned to attend, not only as a representative of this show, but also for the network, have been canceled. And even though you'd think everyone's home now, it's easy to get some Skype interviews in, that doesn't necessarily follow. Everybody's schedule has been upset by this, myself included, so many of the interviews that I'd had scheduled for the week previous and the weeks to come have been canceled or rescheduled. Is this the worst year ever? Hard to say. We'd need a really big fire to compete with 1666, God forbid, and lots of volcanoes to get near 536. Let's just say things aren't the best that they can be right now. It's a small point of pride for me that generally this show continues apace and at a particular standard of quality no matter what. Whatever struggles are happening behind the scenes, you don't hear it on the program. But we're going to break that streak a little bit today. I spoke with Anika Dane and Liz Barr of Antimatter Pod a few weeks ago about the TNG episode, The Offspring. And though the conversation went swimmingly, the audio recording of the talk, not so much. See aforementioned technical problems. My side of the conversation is a little bit Chernobyl. Not great, but not terrible. Not exactly a relaxing spa day for your ears, but not, say, Metal Machine music. Normally, I would scrap the show and see if I could re-record it with the guests, but there's just so much going on right now, it didn't seem like an option. And at the same time, it's such a good discussion, and I like talking with Liz and Anika so much that I couldn't bear to part with the show, so I'm presenting it in full here. Like I said, it's not unlistenable, but my PC mic was doing its own thing during the taping, and there's a consistent muffled hum throughout, like I'm on a starship, but like a dumb starship, a Pac-led ship. Ironically, Liz and Anika both recorded their own side of the talk flawlessly. They sound great. I sound like a dial-up caller on my own show, so maybe just pretend that they have deigned to let me talk about the Offspring on their show, Antimatter Pod. Other than that, it's always great to talk to Anika and Liz. You could find Antimatter Pod at antimatterpod.podbean.com. I've had a lot of fun talking to them. We'll be back next week with a more normal-sounding show, hopefully. In the meantime, stay safe and healthy. And as for me, I'm not exactly going to lose a ton of money by not being able to travel for work and for the show, but I am losing some. So if you want to contribute to the show and maybe buy me a hammer so I can smash the crap out of my dumb computer, or maybe more constructively to help the show continue to grow, you can always help out by going to patreon.com/EISTPOD and becoming a crew member of the show, or by clicking through our Amazon banner or our Amazon links when you're shopping on Amazon. Enjoy our talk on The Offspring, wash them hands, and with that, let's get underway. Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, a.k.a. Caliban, and I too have somehow mastered humor without understanding it. I'm joined once again on this episode by Anika Dane and Liz Barr, the hosts of Antimatter Pod, a Star Trek podcast about fashion, feminism, subtext, and subspace. Anika and Liz, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having us back.
It's great to have you back aboard. Today we'll be talking about The Offspring, the 16th episode of the 3rd season of Star Trek The Next Generation. Star Trek is... ... was the title of the original 16-page pitch document drafted by Gene Roddenberry to sell his show idea to TV networks. The pitch contains many unique ideas that are recognizable in the original series, and many ideas that never made it to screen, like the central vessel being called the Yorktown, the widespread presence of psychic abilities, or the existence of Congo, a planet where blacks had enslaved whites in a parallel to the old plantation days.
Oh no.
Whatever his aspirations regarding social justice may have been, Gene had produced a creative but somewhat dry take on a possible future that fit firmly into the action-adventure mold. But over the course of half a century, perhaps implausibly, Star Trek, through the work of Roddenberry and countless other hands, would evolve into an exemplar of allegorical storytelling in genre fiction. Well, we'll talk about that a little later in the show. Before we talk about that, ladies, we have to talk about Star Trek Picard. And I want to warn any listeners who are not caught up on Picard, whenever this comes out or whenever you're listening to it, that we'll be talking about Picard probably up through episode 5 of Picard. So if you don't want to be spoiled, you might want to skip forward. But when you guys were last on the program, we talked about the TNG episode Cyric, which is just a few episodes back from The Offspring. And of course, it's a great showcase for Picard and the titular character. And we speculated on what we'd see in the series Picard. And now, of course, the show is here. And you guys have been doing a lot of commentary on Picard on your great podcast, Antimatter Pod. And I'm going to do you both something of a disservice by asking you to give me, at first, your general thoughts on the show. Although we can definitely open it up for a larger discussion.
Go for it, Liz. I know you want to.
Liz has got
a conversation I've had in multiple places in the last couple of days, including recording Antimatter Pod yesterday, is that I've realised that Star Trek Picard is not very good, but I like it anyway. And when people criticise it, I want to go, no, it's got these wonderful characters. Why don't you love them as much as I do? But at the same time, it's really, in terms of storytelling, I really don't think it's very good at all.
Would you call it unsophisticated?
That is definitely a word for it.
Okay.
I think they're trying. I don't know that Michael Chabon has enough experience to be show running at this point in his career, and I just wish they had taken a bit more time to revise the scripts and balance out the exposition a little better.
Yeah. Anika, how about you?
Honestly, I think that I can't really judge it at all until I've seen all 10 episodes.
That's fair.
It very much feels like it will make sense in the end, or it will not make sense in the end. Like one of those.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not a story yet.
Yeah, that's. I have a podcast called Discoverage where we talk about CBS All Access shows, Picard among them, and that's kind of been a recurring point on our show. Just the idea that it feels like, you know, they said that it was going to be a 10-hour movie. They said that, you know, before it came out, and it does feel like that. But it feels like maybe it's a 2-hour movie, and we're just going to spend 10 hours with it.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. Like, the story is really interesting, but I don't care for the structure. And I kind of am a structure nerd, so that's what I pay attention to.
Okay.
But at the same time, what I wanted from this series was new characters that I would love, and I've got those in spades. So, swings and roundabouts.
See, I don't really watch anything for plot. Like, ever. So I'm okay with there not being a plot, but when the plot doesn't make sense, I start to worry.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, I'm going to assume that this will eventually make sense and something will happen. But I also love the characters, and I can imagine a lot of different stories being told about these characters. So I'm hoping for that. Like, maybe once they get the main idea out of the way, we can get to something that's really great. That's
interesting, because I think that I probably would bowl right down the middle of your two opinions on that. I do like structure, but I am really there for character and theme, I think. And I don't know, I think that the structure is playing out how you'd expect it to play out in a 2 or 2.5 hour movie. We're just sort of doing it in slow motion. And as far as like those characters, I love the characters so far, but I'm a little dismayed at now we get into spoiler talk. The last episode, which was determined to kill off, it seems, as many characters as it could get away with.
I mean, 2. Only 2.
Well, also Bjayzl, though. I mean, Bjayzl could have been an interesting character in the world of the show going forward, but no more her.
Yeah, she would have made a great recurring villain and a nemesis for Seven of Nine, and it seems like they've had a decade of hating each other, and it's all implied.
Yeah. Which was strange. My co-host on Discoverage was convinced that they had a romantic history, and I guess I didn't...
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, okay. I guess I didn't pick up on that in my first watch.
I definitely picked up on it.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
But I also, asked all of my friends, did you see this, or is it just me because I'm me? So,
Sure.
it was not explicit. It was not textual. It was just, suggested.
Sure. And I guess that would, thankfully, hopefully put paid to the Chakotay Seven relationship then at the end of the last season of Voyager.
I think she's left him behind.
Yeah. I'm hoping
Whatever
so.
happened, she's left him behind.
Yeah. She's moved on. He's no Ranger. It's not Ranger material.
Which is funny because the Rangers seem so Marquis-like.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Chakotay was in it to protect his home, and I assume now he's home, and it wasn't a point of principle for him in the same way as for others.
I kind of
Right.
want B'Elanna to be a Ranger, though. I'll be honest.
Ooh, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I can see that. And Tom stays home and looks after the kids.
Looks after
Exactly.
the kids. Well, we do a live show every Thursday night where we talk about that week's episode of Picard, so if listeners are interested, they can find out more at our Twitter at EISTPod. Anika, I really enjoyed your recent article on Women at Warp entitled Lessons I Learned from the Women of Voyager.
Yes.
And I like that you showcased a few unconventional choices, like Tal Celes and Rain Robinson. And when people write about Voyager, they usually don't single out Kes, but I liked your calling out of Kes's compassion as a character.
Yeah, Kes is often forgotten as a woman of Voyager, even though she was in the main cast for 3 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, I mean, to be fair, Voyager also forgot that she was in the main cast for 3 seasons.
Yeah, they really did.
Sometimes when she was there.
So I understand it, but she was the first Voyager character that I really glommed onto in the pilot. You know, I thought in that first episode, I was like, oh, she's going to be the character that is my favorite. And really in the first, few episodes, which were showcasing her compassion and her eagerness and excitement to be there and try to, sort of insert herself helpfully into the crew, as a contrast to Neelix, who sort of, forced himself into the crew to tell them why they needed his help.
Right.
Instead of...
Yeah.
I always try to give a shout-out to Kes, because I think she could have been an amazing character. I relate her to Deanna Troi often, and say, eventually they figured out that Deanna Troi could be great.
Yeah, right.
It just took a really, really long time, and they never got there with Kes. And I think they have similar, places, and the people who are writing the show just didn't know what to do with that kind of character. They, could be super powerful or could be an ingenue, and...
Yeah, right. Yeah, she was too perfect for the show, maybe, or at least too nice and well-adjusted. And unfortunately, I think that role falls very often to the female characters in shows like this. It's like they're afraid to give them dings and flaws and things you can hang stories on.
Right.
Boo to that. It's great. It's such an internet thing, but in the article you tagged Kes's personality as ill-defined and full of unrealized potential, and nobody said anything. As soon as you called Janeway's characterization messy, surprise, four-paragraph response in the comments.
I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
I mean, people have had strong opinions about Janeway since before she existed.
Yeah.
When they were like, we're going to have a female captain on this show, everyone's like, whoa, no, wait, let me explain to you in 4 paragraphs or more why that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
So.
And I think as a result, Janeway fans can often be very defensive. And certainly it took me a long time to admit, okay, yeah, she is kind of unevenly and inconsistently written.
Yeah.
Because so much of that criticism came from a place of bad faith and people going... she's a woman, therefore we're going to find her flaws. She does have flaws, and some of them are intentional, and some of them are bad writing, and it's been 20 years, I can finally admit it.
I've been on a rewatch recently of Voyager and trying to sort of pin that down. I'm nearing the end of season 5, and it's...
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's hard to pin down. I mean, her progression, I'm not sure if the writers lost the plot or if what they intended isn't coming through. I think Janeway definitely gets harder after, Tuvix and Coda and Scorpion, but she mostly just seems exhausted by the time we get to the Omega Directive and the end of the fourth season.
Yeah.
And as season 5 picks up, with Night, she's just going full hair shirt over her decision to go home the long way.
I think those episodes came out right around the time when I was at uni and I was 19 and I was having my first experience with clinical depression. So that really meant a lot to me at the time.
Yeah.
But I kind of, at the same time, look at it and go, did we have to give this plot to the first female captain?
Right, yeah. The first captain to doubt themselves, and we made it a female.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's try to pep this up a little. Liz, we talked previously about your tracking of gender parity or disparity in Star Trek creators, and I guess we'd need another 50 years for the numbers to totally balance out, but are we trending strongly up for female representation with the advent of all-access series?
In terms of writers for the television show, yes.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing... Picard, not so much, but Discovery has a really good balance in its writers' room.
That's great.
The interesting thing is that the tie-ins are going steadily down. In the 80s, the tie-in writers were 60% female, and today, in the last decade, they have been 12% female. So, that's a bit depressing, and there is currently only one woman actively writing Star Trek novels for the line, and that's Una McCormack, whom I love. And I mean, no criticism at all of the men writing the novels either, but it seems like it's become a very, very small pool, and it's mostly men.
Yeah.
And Una is outnumbered by guys named Dave.
Yeah, mostly guests on this show, which I guess I'd be careful saying bad things about. But I know that Kirsten Beyer does have a novel coming out at the end of this year.
I've had the impression that she's been working on it for a few years and it was put back, and this might be her last.
Oh boy.
Because it looks like the autobiography of Catherine Janeway has been given to Una McCormack, and it looks like she might be taking over the Voyager line. And I've listened to your episodes with all the Daves, and they seem like really nice guys.
No,
and I'm so happy to have them as friends. I don't want less from them. I want more from everyone else. I really want a bigger pool. Which,
me too.
Yeah, I don't know that Simon & Schuster is willing to commit the money to expand the tie-in line.
Well, they certainly should commit it, because they're committing scads and scads of dollars to expanding Trek, on the small screen, and so hopefully that will trickle down to the tie-in books as well.
Hopefully, yeah. It seems like they shrank in 2009 when the economy collapsed and the bottom fell out of the publishing industry, and it's never recovered.
Well, speaking of novels, can you talk at all about the novel that you're working on?
It's a very, very Australian middle grade science fiction.
I have no idea what that means. What does that mean?
It's aimed at about girls about 12, or children about 12 and younger. It's about the heiress to a galactic empire who finds herself stranded alone on her ancestral homeworld of Earth in 1986 in Brisbane.
Okay.
It's the Brisbane part that makes it very, very Australian.
Okay.
But that was an era of a notoriously corrupt, super right-wing government, and so if you're going to put an alien conspiracy anywhere in Australian history, it would absolutely be 80s Brisbane.
Okay.
It's also my home city, so
Sure.
This is really a love letter to a tiny and ridiculous city, and I don't know if it will have wide appeal, but a lot of local people seem very enthusiastic, so yeah, I'm revising and then I'll submit.
That's great, and good luck with that. I have been trying to get into Ozploitation films. Yeah, I've started off, of course, with like Mad Max, and kind of worked my way to Dead End Drive-In and films like that. And so those always seem to take place in like an apocalyptic landscape, but it's sort of a similar...
Yeah, we call it the Northern Territory.
The Northern Territory, thanks. Yeah, I do get that one. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. And please let us know when that moves forward.
Thank you.
Well, why did you guys choose this specific episode, The Offspring, to discuss today?
Obviously, it's because Data has daughters in Star Trek Picard,
Well,
and they're the main plot,
Yeah.
as much as there is a plot.
This episode is fascinates me, and it gets lost, I think, behind the measure of a man. This is really more the measure of a parent, or the measure of a child. And I think it's just as important as that episode, and it's also important, I think, just looking for the whole sort of overarching development of the show as a real turning point for Trek. And we all know that Trek really starts to get going in the third season, and a lot of people would peg it around the time of Yesterday's Enterprise, and of course The Offspring is a show where things really start to turn around, and we get to see TNG fire on all cylinders and be the show that is producing episodes that we'll remember.
Yeah, and it was just so, like you say, I think it's often overshadowed by The Measure of a Man, and even I dismissed it recently as The Measure of a Man, but with more emotional manipulation. But rewatching it, it's a really wonderful story about parenthood and the difficulty of being a parent when you're a marginalised person, and how even if your personhood is recognised, people can give lip service to that but not respect it. And even Picard has this initial reaction of how dare Data reproduce without consulting me.
Yeah. Which is so... I know, which I've been puzzling over that reaction, if it's just the sort of last gasp of the kind of stuffy Picard that we get in early TNG, or if he's probably thinking, we just did this already. We already went through the whole thing with your rights, and I got to do this all over again, and I got to see Philippa Lavoie again, probably. And yeah, he's envisioning a headache that, of course, Data shouldn't have to think about, but is not thinking about.
No, I think it's that, and it's also Picard, despite claims about TNG, Picard is a guy with flaws, and he is Data's greatest champion, but he still has his blind spots.
Yeah, yeah, he certainly does. Well, we're talking the TNG episode, The Offspring, the 16th episode of the third season of the show. It first aired on March 12th of 1990, just a little under 30 years ago as a recording of this. It was written by Renee Echeverria. Echeverria wrote or contributed to a total of 41 scripts between his time on TNG and DS9. He also served as an executive story editor on TNG and a producer on DS9. And he got his start in Hollywood on Trek, but he went on to write and produce for series like Medium, Castle, and Terra Nova, and he co-created the series The 4400 and Carnival Row.
Oh, wow.
The episode was directed by Jonathan Frakes, who of course originated the role of William Riker on TNG and its spin-offs, but he also became a prolific director in the franchise, directing 19 episodes combined of TNG, DS9, Voyager, Discovery, and Picard, as well as the feature films First Contact and Insurrection. The stardate given in the episode is 43657.0, and your assignment, Anika and Liz, if you can, is to give us a 25-word synopsis of The Offspring.
Custody battle between Starfleet and Data over his daughter ends quite badly.
Oh, that's so sad.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of Admiral versus Android.
Yeah.
But it's also about... It's a very contracted coming-of-age story. For, honestly, both Lal and Data.
I think I would criticize... usually the kind of story where we've got a character, if it's a film or an ongoing series, we have an established character that we know, somebody comes into their life and changes it, and then they die of unspecified illness, and the person is like, I'm really changed, I'm going to move forward differently from this. That's kind of what we have here, but yet I don't feel that way about this episode.
No, it's interesting, and I think that's part of how well it is done, that it doesn't feel like that cliche.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a trope that you see. White guy learns something from woman, minority, what have you, who has to go away or die, yeah.
I was going to say, it's also the classic Mary Sue storyline of a woman with a connection to one of the men of the series comes in, has a significant part in his life, and then dies tragically and is mourned by everyone.
Yeah, that was, I was just about to talk about Renee Echeverria writing the script, and this was his first spec script. Probably not altogether, but the one that he submitted to Trek under their open acceptance program. And the original version of the script was called Bloodlines, and it was totally focused on, I don't know if she was called Lal, but the analog character, which is something that they tell you, and I think is in their submission Bible, like, don't do that.
Do this.
Yeah, don't write a script where Lieutenant Mary Sue comes on, and everybody thinks she's really great, and oh no, she's got to go, yeah. But they reworked it, and Michael Piller really liked the idea, and of course, they reworked the story so that it would focus not just on the character of Lal, but also Data and his experiences as a parent, and also his motivations in creating her, I find fascinating in the episode. So yes,
Yeah.
it was Escheria's work, but Melinda Snodgrass and Michael Piller also reportedly did page one rewrites of the story. And the episode is also Jonathan Frakes' first work as a director. This is the first episode of TNG to be directed by a cast member, a process that would become fairly de rigueur for shows going forward. And Frakes studied hard to be ready for his role as director, although he said that he was happy that he drew a Data episode as his first, because Data episodes always work.
That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. But I would offer my own axiom. Guinan episodes always work. And this, of course, is an episode featuring Guinan. Whoopi Goldberg had lobbied during the production of the episode that one of her lines be changed from when a man and woman are in love to when two people are in love, arguing that the world of Star Trek had evolved beyond heteronormativity. That line does not appear in the episode. It was also decided on set that the scene with the line in question would feature a same-sex couple holding hands. This was nixed by the production office when supervising producer David Livingston came down to ensure that that did not happen.
Yeah.
History does not record the name of the homophobic narc that made the call to the production offices.
Well, at least Whoopi tried.
Yeah, someone was out there fighting the fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know what the huge objection would have been, except, and I don't know if this is the episode for that. Someday we're going to have a big episode about this, but just the climate of homophobia, or at least just not wanting to explore any LGBTQ issues on the show under the auspices of Rick Berman. But I don't know what the problem would have been with that. This seems like a great, even if you're going to do lip service, this seems like a great lip service moment.
Right.
I don't think Berman even wanted lip service, to be honest. And I don't want to single him out because I'm sure that his opinions were very, very common, and if it hadn't been him, it would have been someone else. But, yeah.
Yeah, I someday we're going to really dig into that on the show. Not today, though. This episode's well remembered by many Star Trek personnel. Jonathan Frakes in 2001 called it the best sci-fi episode the show had done, and his favorite to direct. It's one of Michael Doran's favorite two episodes, the other one being The Drumhead. Michael Piller.
He's not even in this.
I know.
No, and I know, and that's a great recommendation, because yeah, it's not even one that he's in. He's just like, oh, they're just good episodes. Michael Piller called it one of his favorite TNG episodes, along with Measure of a Man and The Inner Light, so that is rare company. He even went so far to make sure that the episode got a second airing during sweeps to increase its exposure and hopefully put it on the radar for a technical Emmy Award. And Mary Wiseman, the actress behind Ensign Tilly, also calls this her favorite episode.
Aww.
Yeah, which I thought was neat. I love how you always get the question asked of actors that come on to Trek. Did you know anything about Trek, before you got hired to work for Trek? Right. And you get somebody like Jerry Ryan who's like, no, I didn't watch Star Trek. But of course, on a long enough timeline, we're all Trek fans now, right? Like, you hire Michelle Hurd for Picard, and she's like, of course I watched Trek. Like,
yeah.
Which I think is really great. In contrast to all this love, Melinda Snodgrass did not like the episode much, saying that she felt that it was, quote, fairly obvious and tired and stupid. She also, she also said it had a lot to do with Measure of a Man, which I don't think we needed to do again so soon. And she said, quote, it was a good show for Jonathan to start with. It was a nice bottle show, and he didn't have to cope with alien cultures.
I
faint praise
understand.
With Dan.
Yeah, I understand where Melinda is coming from, but I think she's wrong.
I don't disagree with your opinion about friend of the show, Melinda Snodgrass's opinion.
Yeah. Well, I just think, Measure of a Man was her episode. And, the Offspring does come quite fast after that, and it does retread some ground. And I think she was probably...
that?
Well, I think she was probably too close to the story to appreciate the parallels and the way this episode builds on Measure of a Man. Yeah. And I think it's not unreasonable for a writer to feel a bit protective about their work and maybe resent a bit that it's the subject of a retread so fast.
Yeah, and she was, I know, disappointed with and frustrated with the management at the time and some of the output, and so I can understand why she would have that opinion. Speaking of episodes connected to this, there was a discussion about possibly having a sequel episode to The Offspring in the 5th season of TNG. In it, Lore would steal Lal's body and attempt to reactivate her using the Soong emotion chip, but cooler heads prevailed and the idea was scrapped.
Oh my god.
Oh, well, now I think we know how Star Trek Picard is going to end.
Okay, well, we gotta cut all this. No. Yeah, I can't see what we would have got out of Dark Lal, or whatever they were going to do with it.
I'm not a big Lore fan. I think the less the better. And this is a perfect little standalone.
Also, just steal Lal's body.
I know.
Just stop. Stop. No. You don't have to finish that sentence. Do not do that.
She's just in a storage locker or something on Deck 36. Yeah, right.
Maybe Data's keeping her in his quarters?
She's just propped up in the corner.
Yeah.
Spot is using her for a scratching post. Yeah, not great.
Really disturbing. Okay.
Let's talk.
You're welcome.
Wait, let's talk about the guest stars in the episode. And there is only 2, maybe 3 that I can think of. This is this is a bottle show, so it's sort of low bandwidth. Hallie Todd plays Lal. Todd is an actress, producer, and writer. And her mother was Anne Morgan Gilbert, who played Millie Helper on the Dick Van Dyke Show. And she was the stepdaughter of Guy Raymond, who played the bartender in the original series episode The Trouble with Tribbles.
Oh, wow!
Yeah, interesting connections. Her feature film debut was an uncredited role in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and she's gone on to several recurring and regular roles on television, including Penny on the 80s ABC sitcom Brothers, and Jo McGuire, the mother of the titular character on the show Lizzie McGuire.
Which I have never watched, but my sister was a big fan when that was a thing.
Yeah, Lizzie McGuire was huge in my household.
Yeah, was it?
Huge.
I never saw it, but I know that it is coming back for a reboot, and she will actually be on the reboot, too.
That's so fun. I'm going to, look out for her now.
Yeah.
Yeah, my daughter is,
as we're
super
done here.
excited for more Lizzie McGuire.
Oh, that's great. Well, she's also written 2 nonfiction books based on her life and experiences being young actors and parenting young actors.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Yeah, Nicholas Coster appears as Admiral Anthony Halftill. Coster's had a long career on TV and film. Most of his career has been spent on daytime TV, where he's been featured on nearly every soap opera that you can think of. He's also appeared in films like All the President's Men, Reds, and Betsy's Wedding. And in 2017, he won a Daytime Emmy for his work on the Amazon Prime series, The Bay.
Oh.
And finally, Leonard Crowfoot appears as the ungendered form of Lal. Crowfoot is an actor and dancer who originally appeared in Trek in the first season TNG episode, Angel One. He's a little guy who's Mistress Beata's sort of aide-de-camp or what have you.
No way!
Really?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. He's the guy that gets all jealous, when she starts making eyes at Riker, and he's oh, he's all mad. And he also appeared as an unnamed Komar dignitary in the 6th season episode of Voyager, Virtuoso.
Good on him.
Let's talk about the episode itself. I read a Hollywood Reporter story that came out just this week that describes the mood in the production and writing offices at this time in TNG when this episode came out. And it's an oral history interview with Ronald D. Moore and Iris Even Bear about the production of Yesterday's Enterprise, which is the episode right before this one.
Right before, yes.
Yeah, and they're talking about how chaotic the production on the 3rd season was. Everybody was behind and stressed out. They were writing like mad. They were short on scripts. And morale was very low. And everybody had to work very hard on Yesterday's Enterprise to get it turned around. This is the famous thing where they had to take it home over Thanksgiving weekend, basically, as homework and come back in. But once it was released, it turned out so well. It was so well received. And Moore and Bear described how satisfying it was and how the staff was energized. And that became a real turning point in the production of the show. And I think it's really interesting because Michael Piller didn't actually love Yesterday's Enterprise all that much. He really preferred the Offspring. He just didn't like the alternate universe stuff, and he felt like that wasn't like a fit for the show. And he preferred the more personal drama of the Offspring. And he was kind of alone in that. Everybody on the show that worked on the show, almost everyone, Melinda Snodgrass, liked The Offspring, but they thought that yesterday's Enterprise was so much better. And there's an argument or a discussion that I used to really push on the show. I haven't talked about it in a while. That when I hear a lot of Trek fans talk about their favorite episodes of the show, they're episodes that you wouldn't necessarily think of as ones that espouse Trek's premise of seeing liberal social values played out in sci-fi allegory. They always cite like Yesterday's Enterprise, Best of Both Worlds, Scorpion, the War Arc of DS9, the splody ones. And and I wonder if people know what show they're watching. And then I go on social media and it seems clear that no, most people have no idea what show they're watching.
For me, I am a cliche. Yesterday's Enterprise is one of my favourite TNG episodes. But for me, it's because it is so different, and it makes me appreciate the regular universe so much more. And the darkness and the war, it's really cool. I loved all of that in Discovery as well. Yeah. But I am glad that it's not the only thing we get in Trek.
My favorite episode of TNG is Ensign Row.
Okay, sure.
Which is, nothing even happens in that episode.
Yeah.
It is literally about people talking about their lives to each other and making friends.
Yeah.
So, I think I'm an outlier.
Well, my other favourite is Rascals, where everyone's turned into kids, so please do not take me as any kind of arbiter of taste.
Hang up right now, Liz. Come on. I love the talky ones too, and I don't hate the action ones. I just feel like it's so easy. I feel like that's a different show. I think it's so easy to slip into who are we fighting this week. There are certain parts of Voyager, and they're great episodes of Voyager, but there's certain parts of Voyager where it's just what percentage of the shield's at now. We're just being buffeted by fire, and then we use the right weapon or something, and then it's just all just war and conflict. And DS9, I think, definitely earned it because they spent so much time laying all this groundwork, and we understand the emotional and social underpinnings of the war. And then, we get the release, we get the war, and it just works so much better. But there's other action space shows. I want to see people arguing over whether an android has the right to exist.
Yeah, I think that there's room in Star Trek for both.
Well, sure.
And I think... again, I understand where Michael Piller is coming from, and I disagree, but I do think he had a point. This is a very underrated episode that's a bit overshadowed by its place in the season.
How do you two feel that, New Trek, the Discovery and Picard, where do they fit on that spectrum?
I think because they're serialized stories, it's less easy to break it down into this is a talky Trek or this is a shooty Trek.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to say, and I think they're sort of their own thing, and they're trying to explore really big, abstract, complicated ideas over a very long period of time with occasional interludes for the shooty, bang, bang. Or not so occasional in the case of Discovery.
Yeah. An argument that you hear all the time online is, that this isn't Trek, or it's not as good as Trek used to be. And I think the core of that argument, in some cases, is what you're describing, that people are seeing a serial story instead of, an episodic story, and are not really being able to assimilate that, if you will. But I don't think that Trek has... I think it still holds up the same values, and it's delivering episode by episode, perhaps more, this much talky, this much shooty.
Yeah. I also think, Starship Mine is as much Trek as any of the talky philosophical episodes.
Sure. There's speaking of talky, there's a very specific talky subplot in that where Data is trying to learn
small talk.
How to survive at a cocktail party. Yeah. And
there is a part of me that would enjoy a whole episode of nothing
just
but that.
Yeah, right, yeah. But then there's a weird... It's almost like the writers didn't know how to synthesize the two, because there's a weird turn where when the terrorists come out, I think that guy gets killed. The talking...
Yeah, it's pretty creepy and
boring
terrible.
Captain guy is gone, yeah. So, just today online I saw a comment. Somebody posted just something innocuous, a photo of some Borg extras on set. and a guy commented, "Oh, is that Bernie Sanders' campaign office?" And I'm like, "What? What is that even supposed to mean?" But this is the kind of person who comments, it's not Trek. And here's another thing I like to do, and by I mean, here's my existential bucket of cold water for the day, but if you click through to these people's profiles, they are the unhappiest people you will ever see. Forget the PragerU vids that they're constantly sharing. Forget the attacks on snowflakes. Forget that they're Canadian and they have socialized medicine and somehow that's a tragedy. But they're unfailingly locked in a constant war with an enemy that's just like, you okay, bro? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, and whether it's politics or whatever fandom I'm in, I really do try to avoid becoming that person.
Yeah.
If I'm that unhappy with my life, I really need to make some changes. But some of these guys, like, we got a troll who accused me of having a heavily misandrist podcast, which I'm very proud of. I don't even think we're that misandrist. But
I don't think they know what that word means.
It means women having opinions, right?
Yeah.
But I looked at his profile, and it was entirely him defending William Shatner from the mean feminists and fighting with people who like The Last Jedi. And, I realise that social media is just a small piece of one's life, and it doesn't reflect one's full experience. But
right.
I just want to tell this guy to step back and, find some other way to enrich himself. Enrich his being.
That movie has been out for a couple years now. They really need to let it go.
I hear it has a sequel.
Why do we like this show when the fan base is so toxic?
I just really love these characters.
You can't let the toxic fan base stop your enjoyment of the show. That's what they want. They win if you stop watching the show because you can't take arguing with them anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mostly just ignore them, and I have my own nice curated space on the internet where we talk about important things like Picard's Romulan housekeepers and how much they love French pastry.
Yeah. I promise we'll actually talk about Dana and Lal in a minute, but I was talking at the beginning of the show about the perception of Trek as being this gospel that has brought, allegorical sci-fi to us. And, looking into its history and its background, maybe that's not so true. What do you girls think about the legend of St. Roddenberry bringing us the tablets from down the mountain of peace and equality?
I think Gene Kuhn and Dorothy Fontana did that work.
I think if you put anything on a pedestal, you're going to be disappointed.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
What you should get out of Trek is you should appreciate the things and the lessons you learn and the things that you like and how it makes you feel and makes you think. But you should also acknowledge that other people are going to feel and think and see other things, and that's what's great about it. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think it's a mistake to credit something's success or failure to any one single person, even though I do it all the time, but I'm trying not to. And Star Trek, the original series, was a collaboration, and all of the Star Trek since have been collaborations, and Roddenberry had brilliant ideas and terrible ideas, and so did everyone else who was involved in the show.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
And I mean, I'm definitely, as soon as anyone starts saying, or brings up the question of what Gene Roddenberry would think of Discovery, for example, I have to excuse myself from that conversation. Because first of all, we can't possibly know. So it's really a silly concept. He's not going to come down from space and tell us,
I need to cancel
he's not going to
the necromancy?
He's not going to surprise, I'm time traveling from the past. That's not going to happen, so we can't know. And trying to argue about it just seems silly. If you don't like Discovery, you cannot like Discovery, and you don't have to bring Gene Roddenberry into it at all.
I talked about the pitch document before, and that's all he wrote on paper. That's what he brought to networks that were clearly run by middle-aged white men as well. And I guess I'm not really familiar with the lieutenant or his work before he got to Star Trek. But just looking at this guy from the outside, it doesn't seem like you're going to get this progressive show just from this guy. And as you guys said, many people have contributed to it as well. And like TOS and even TNG, there's this kind of, early TNG for sure, there's this presumptuousness about the stories are all, well, we fixed our problems, and so we're going to go somewhere else and see, oh boy, this backward culture and their problems.
Right.
There's something
Right.
that on our, I think Liz pointed out in an episode of Antimatter Pod, you were talking about Picard, which is something that I noticed too. It must have been a clear, intentional decision to put Picard in the costume of a colonizer when he goes to this planet, this dry, dusty planet of like mud and wood buildings. Like, what were they trying to say with that?
Yeah, I don't know. But it's interesting how complacent the Federation was in the first couple of seasons of Next Gen.
Yeah.
And slowly the cracks begin to appear with the Measure of a Man, and then just the absolute shock of Q-Who and the Borg, and that's when we start to get a more nuanced and critical vision. And then we have this Admiral Haftel in the Offspring, who doesn't seem like a bad person, and he's certainly not a cackling villain, but he commits what Terry Pratchett calls the ultimate sin of treating people as things. And that's certainly a lot more of a much more interesting way to have a villain and a badmiral than cackling and taking over the universe.
Right, yeah, rubbing your hands together.
Yeah.
I just think that it's an amazing work of additive kind of fiction, the Star Trek universe, because you start with, this white male American spaceman who says, that we've solved hunger and want and we don't pursue riches and things like that. And whether or not that's really espoused, the people who come later saw that, and now they are creating stories that are embodying that even more. Well, I was going to move on. I was just going to say that I love this episode, and it's one of the episodes I strongly remember from watching the show when it was originally on. I or somebody in my house must have taped it, because I clearly remember watching it over and over. And I'm glad that you guys chose it for this episode, because it was great to watch it again with a more critical eye. And I think it's really what sci-fi, in my opinion, is for, and Star Trek specifically. It's a very basic story about parenthood and the death of a child, but it fits so well into the world of TNG. And, we've talked about, I'm not sure where Melinda Snodgrass is coming from when she says that it was unnecessary, but this episode, and of course Measure of a Man, are the basis for the next generation in Picard.
Right.
Yeah, which is obviously the reason I wanted to watch it, and I kept picturing, the characters of Picard going through the logs and looking at the footage of Lal, and, this is Soji and Daja's older sister. She's the prototype.
Yes.
Yeah, right. The premise, I think, is actually a little scary. I mean, Data's not scary at all. He's best android, but when you write a sci-fi story about the robot revolution, it starts with robots making robots.
But when the robot has made a robot who's just a nice girl who wants to learn and make friends and learn how to hold hands, I for one welcome our robot overlords.
It is
Wally.
Yeah, right, yeah. And she's dressed somewhat unthreateningly as, she looks like Snow White a little bit.
She looks a lot like Snow White.
Yeah. As somebody with a positronic brain, I have to wonder if she has the Asimovic laws. I'm not sure that they're totally canon in Star Trek, but they certainly make a lot of connections between Asimov and Data's positronic brain.
Well, that's definitely what was missing from Law's programming.
Yeah, that was one where he just winged it, and it's like, let's skip the laws. Whoops, yeah.
Yeah. Which is what happens when you have tech bros making things and not thinking about the ethical implications.
You get a real Age of Ultron situation. I'm fascinated by the argument in the episode, and I think it has merit, that Data makes about being a species of one.
Yes.
Okay, we established in Measure of a Man that he's alive, more or less. So being alive and being quote-unquote human means creating a family and nurturing it. So bing, bang, bop, here's a pinkish, weird-faced kid I made.
Yeah, and it's more than that. He wants to improve upon himself. And I think, people have children for all sorts of reasons. But for Data choosing to build a child more or less from scratch, I think that's a really good motivation, which fits fits the premise of his character as someone who doesn't feel emotion, but also it's kind of emotional.
And he wants a legacy. He wants there to be something of himself that he can leave behind.
Yeah.
In the case of his destruction, which is what happens.
Right.
Flash forward to Star Trek Picard, and that's where we are.
And I still wonder, how did Data consent to Maddox, using his material in this way? Because there are certainly questions raised, but maybe they did discuss it.
And just since we're talking about Picard here, there are two things stuck out. One, the Admiral literally used Romulans as the example of who's going to destroy both androids. So that was fun. And then at the very end, Data says that he basically downloaded Lal's essence into his own positronic brain.
Right.
And at least Dr. Girardi's theory of how Soji and Daj were created is that a tiny bit of data
positronic fractal
was used.
Yeah.
And so I was like, so it's Lal. Or it
Not
could
only that, but I think it's hinted that Soji and Daj, not Daj anymore, but Soji has the ability to access Data's memories at some point in her evolution. So, at least in theory. So, in a way, Lal lives on. And we have Data with the 5 queens in the dream sequence that opens Picard's first episode.
Yeah.
And so that's like 2 sets of twins and Lal.
I like it.
Lal asks Data what their purpose is, and he says it's to contribute in a positive way to the world in which we live. And I had to wonder if that was Data's personal philosophy, if that was Soong's sort of, ROM programming, or if that's just he's just parroting the sort of Federation creed.
That moment jumped out at me because how many TV shows are just going to casually toss off, oh yeah, this is why we exist.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Here is our philosophy for living.
Yeah.
In a throwaway line.
Yeah, but I feel like I've heard a similar sentiment from Picard before from people in that universe. So.
I can definitely believe it as a Starfleet adage. And which I like, because I'm always complaining that they don't define Starfleet enough in modern Trek, and yet expect us to understand what it is. Yeah. So that is like, okay, maybe this is what they mean, are these ideas of creating positivity.
It's also like in a society where economically you don't have to work, what do you do? And so you raise people and encourage them to contribute in some positive way.
Yeah.
Right.
Not everybody, though. I think Tom Paris would just work on his 69 Camaro or something all day, but
that would be contributing something.
That brings joy to fellow car nerds.
That's true. Yeah, you'd still have auto shows in the 24th century. There's been a lot of speculation, especially recently with the premiere of Picard, over how good, quote-unquote, the Federation actually is. And I think that you get a statement like that from Data, which seems to imply that, that is the party line as far as it goes, but then we see that A, not everybody's doing that in something like Picard, and B, maybe that's not even completely realistic. It's possible to have a credo and people just not follow it, or just be like, observe it more in the breach than the observance.
Yeah, and not even necessarily villains or criminals, but people who are just morally lazy.
Yeah. Yeah, moral laziness. That's what we have to conquer to get to Star Trek. I find it troubling that every time we face a quandary like this over artificial life, be it Data or Lal or the Doctor or exocomps, it seems like the Federation and the powers that be are committed to the clearly wrong choice.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if maybe the big secret in Picard that the Zhat Vash and everyone is carrying around is going to address that in some way. And maybe it really does come back to control in Discovery, or, some secret massacre or whatever that, there's just this really strong cultural bias against artificial intelligence.
There also seems to be a momentum towards the kind of slavery that Guinan points out in Measuring Man, unfortunately. We go through so many episodes like this where time and time again, it's proved that clearly this is wrong. Like, just like with real-world discrimination, the solution is exposure, meeting and knowing the person or people that you're discriminating against. Every one of these episodes, we've got somebody who's discriminating against Data. They spend 10 minutes with him, and they're like, oh, yeah, he's human. But yet, despite all of that, it just seems like there's this slide into, well, clearly you're going to make a bunch of disposable workers to be on Mars.
Well, that's moral laziness too, because it's just easier if we say they're not real and we're not hurting anything, then we can get away with it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I liked about Una McCormack's Picard novel is that it specifically stated that the synths were not sentient and were not designed to have capacity for sentience.
Okay.
And Picard's first thought when he hears of the attack is, oh my god, they have developed sentience and they didn't want to be our slaves.
Uh-huh.
And it actually really troubles me that this is not made clear in the show, because I think, given this franchise's history...
Yeah, you see a guy with...
should have been made clear.
Yeah, you see a guy with, like, gold skin and eyes, and you're like, well, okay, I know that this guy has the potential to be sentient or whatever, but you're saying that it's clear that they are limited, and they are not.
Yeah, they were designed to be tools, and they were not meant to have the capacity to evolve. Maybe they did, anyway.
To quote Jurassic Park.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
Life finds a way.
Will find a way.
And if that turns out to be the case, then, once again, the Federation will have made a terrible error. But I don't...
Of course.
They did not set out to create an intelligent slave race.
I don't think that the Federation ever intentionally does all of the horrible things that the Federation does.
Oh, no. But it makes me feel better to know that this was a consideration at some point.
Yeah.
And
right.
It should have been made clear
and
on screen.
We can also sort of universalize to say, because we've had discussions about holograms and how close to sentience, or if you leave one on long enough, like the Doctor, will it just become sentient? Or because then it seems like a problem if you're using them for whatever you want to use them for.
Yeah.
But enough about Rios and his harem of holograms that look like him.
So I'm just saying, we can universalize it too, that they made a point of making it so that those were false holograms. We're not capable of it, which doesn't mean that they aren't capable of it. It means that they tried to make them not.
They're not even using their slaves right, because we see in that episode everybody's complaining about working on a holiday or a double shift or whatever. That's why you have slave labor, so you can go home on Memorial Day.
I never understood, that whole scene really confuses me on many levels. Because we just were talking about how Tom Paris would never do that. He would just fix his car all the time. And so it's like, so how did these guys get the short straw of we're going to do this menial task on a holiday and get blown up?
Well, I just think that the scale of the Romulan evacuation was such that they couldn't let everyone have the day off.
Right. And somebody drew the short straw.
Yeah, which, lives are at stake,
That's
so
part
you're
of
going to grumble, but you're still going to go to work.
Right. I think that there is something, we've talked about this a little bit on the show recently as well, that there is a glaring lack of automation and AI outside of Data and the Doctor and Star Trek, and I think that the solution that I've come to personally is that Gene Roddenberry just wasn't interested in talking or telling stories about AI. A robot or a computer was something Kirk had to talk to death to get to the end of the episode. And of course, we're fascinated with that stuff in the last half of the 20th century, and so we're seeing it now in Picard. But this world is additive still, and the fact that we haven't seen it, you can't just erase that and put little R2-D2 drones in Discovery and pretend like they've always been there. It is missing for a reason, and I just think that my headcanon of the reason is that Federation citizens are a little squicky about this. They want to, even though they complain about it in their space food or whatever, they want to contribute and they want to work, and that's why their civilization works. And handing it off to something else seems weird. Definitely handing it off to something else with a nose and eyes and a mouth is weird. But
it's distasteful.
Yeah, but as we're passing into the 25th century, we've crossed some line where they're like, well, either out of necessity or just changes in social attitudes, we're fine with it now.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, I think, like, I don't really have a problem with the presence of drones in Discovery, because I think as a society our idea of what technology is capable of has evolved, and there's less of a sense of the robots are going to take our jobs, because we know that those drones still need operators and so forth.
Yeah.
And it's just the difference between sending a machine that's controlled by a human sitting on a couch versus sending out a human in a space suit.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't an option.
Right, and if you take that far enough, why are we sending anybody? Like, why isn't every ship just populated by datas? Or if the Enterprise's computer can achieve sentience, as it does at the end of TNG, why not just send the ship? Yeah.
Well, you know, a whole ship crewed by datas is what Maddox wanted in Measure of a Man.
Yeah.
And look how he ended up.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that is...
But don't people want to be on the spaceships?
Oh, no, that's... Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. And take their families with them, which doesn't make any sense. But Maddox,
it makes more sense on the Enterprise than it did on, like, Seven's ship with her parents. That was don't take your family with
but
you.
weren't they? They were kind of like wackos, though, weren't they?
Yeah, they were crazy scientists.
Yeah, they had fringe scientists. Yeah. For me, like bringing.
Apparently, they were Bernie Bros.
They were yeah.
Sorry, was that
Bruce,
is it because they said a communist joke? I'm really stuck in this.
I
want to understand, except I don't really.
Can we talk about emotions? Soong developed these robots who don't have emotions. That's the party line. But Data clearly is capable of emotion, and has for the entire series, and maybe he's accustomed to feeling them, or maybe they're underdeveloped, but he couldn't do any of the things that he does without emotion. And so what's going on? Why does Soong feel the need to gaslight his son that he can't or doesn't feel emotion?
I think that Soong is a scientist and an engineer, and, you know, he's about robotics. And he doesn't know what emotional intelligence is, because that's not his field. And so he doesn't understand that he has emotions and that Data has emotions. Like, he just doesn't realize that emotions aren't something that are, like, created by magic or cooked chocolate chip cookies, right? That's not what an emotion comes from. An emotion actually is a synapse in your brain lighting up, and, you know, based on something that's happening, which is exactly what, if I understand how Data's work, which I don't, but if I understand how Data's work, their positronic brains are the same as our carbon-based life form brains.
Sure. our moist brains, yeah.
Yes.
And so emotions would still work the same way, in my opinion, as a social scientist.
Yeah. Like, I think to some extent emotions are driven by, like, hormones and chemical reactions, and Data doesn't have adrenaline and therefore doesn't feel fear in the sense of panic, but he has certainly expressed fear in the sense of being concerned for the welfare of his crewmates and his friends.
Right.
And I think in a way this is an allegory for how people with autism don't necessarily express their emotions the way neurotypical people expect, and therefore there's this cliche that they don't have feelings at all, when in fact generally autistic people have a full range of emotion.
Sure.
They just don't necessarily express it.
Yeah. This, speaking of emotions, this is a great episode if you want to see a lot of scenes of Picard sighing unhappily as the scene ends. He's really kind of going through it in this scene. And Stewart does a great job, and he does a great job of showing Picard's attempts to sort of elide over some of the situations. Like when he talks with the Admiral, there's some great code switching with him where he at first begins like, oh, this isn't a problem, and then he's kind of trying to not pull rank because he's lower rank, but he's trying to establish that, no, I think we're going to do this, and the Admiral's not having it. And then later on he's drinking tea with the Admiral, and he's like, well, you'll get what you want, just at a later time. And nothing seems to work because this guy comes in and he just wants to get this android. to his little lab, but there's a lot of like sort of emotional tactics being played by Picard.
And one of them does seem to be that he's on the verge of offering that ultimatum where if Starfleet does this, I will tender my resignation.
Yeah, it's another quit Starfleet situation. Yeah.
How many times has he played this card? I mean, really?
Yeah, after a while, well, he plays it for the last time, I guess, in the Picard series, but yeah.
Maybe it's like all those times Tom Baker used to threaten to quit Doctor Who and then was really shocked and outraged when they're like, okay, cool, we'll line up a replacement then.
Sure, right.
Bye.
Dr. Crusher gets to weigh in this episode as a mother, which unfortunately most of her characterization is I'm a mom. But this is the right way. This is the right way to do it, I think. Not just having her exclaim "my son" randomly.
Yeah, and she's also the mother of an extremely gifted child, which is something that not every parent has experience with. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I really liked her advice that you can let your kid know that you had similar problems and that you can empathise with them, which is what Data is going to do. And yeah, I thought this was a good role for her, and I wish we had gotten to see Lal hanging out with Wesley, because they seem like they're the same age, and he is a genius and an outsider. And, you know, maybe instead of sending her into the kids' class, they could have put her in classes with Wesley. I'm not sure he's the guy I would want to socialise anyone, but you go with what you've got.
But Guinan could have taken them both to socialization classes.
Man, instead of letting Wesley on the bridge, why didn't they just give him a job in 10 Forward where he would actually learn stuff?
Oh, right. Well, so... Can we talk about how degrading the Admiral is about 10 Forward and people who work there?
It took
her
to a bar.
What the hell is wrong with being a cocktail waitress?
I was super annoyed with him. And it was also, like, it was like, I am going to be Admiral Patriarchy for a moment here and tell you how, like, all of this is, you know, you shouldn't be socializing her to begin with. You shouldn't be treating her as some lesser human being, like a cocktail waitress. Like, it was very, you know, I'm worried about her potential as this perfect virginal woman, and you can't send her into 10 Forward of all places. It was gross.
My God, a bar that serves synthahol.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, obviously, you do a modern reading of something and you find things that maybe weren't intended, but yeah, what you're pointing out is really strange. And what is his backstory? I feel like something was cut, or there was some element that didn't make it into the final script, but, you know, Guinan's like, you've been in a bar or two.
I know.
And then later on, he's talking about, you know, he's arguing that they should let Lal go with him, and his argument is, I am a parent. It's like, okay. And he says, and I know how hard it is to let your kids go or whatever. What happened to Admiral Kavanaugh's kids? Like, did they get taken away from him or something?
I just took that as like an extremely sketchy background, that he's one of those people who thinks that because he has kids, he's an expert on parenting.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't raise those kids.
No, right.
Yeah, Mrs. the Admiral raised them.
He's taking care of those kids. I mean, clearly, I think that's one of those things that I've gotten out of all of Star Trek, is that if you are a Starfleet officer, you don't have a personal life, and if you do, it's someone else is taking care of the kids and taking care of the family.
Yeah.
Like, it's all of our characters that we know and love, their relations are like a disaster. They're either estranged, or we never see them, or they're blown up, or die in a fire.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
or, you know, Sisko is the greatest dad in the series, but he still takes off at the end of Deep Space Nine to become a prophet.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
You know, Avery Brooks was
Against
very
that,
hesitant about that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great point about Data, and I was thinking about him talking about how it's important that he's with Lal and she grows up with him, and thinking about his background and him being an orphan, essentially, and not only being somebody
raised
who had
Starfleet.
Not only didn't have any parents, but grew up in a military organization. So the way that he views things is definitely through that lens. and they want to orphan this girl, basically, and who knows how she'll turn out.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, it's kind of that story of parenting as a marginalised person. And Australia has a history of stealing children from Indigenous people and raising them, having them raised by the state or by white people.
So does
And I don't want to say that, I don't want to say that Data, an extremely white man, is in any way a stand-in, but I think there's a parallel there if you can see it and if you can apply some empathy and imagination.
Yeah.
And Data was in Starfleet for 18 years before he came aboard the Enterprise, and he seems to have had no friends and no mentors in humanity before he joined this ship. And I think he must have been very lonely, and he clearly doesn't want that for his daughter.
Right.
Which is fair. Why would he want it for her? And I also, they're right in that, first of all, Picard says, okay, I am willing to let Data take a leave of absence and go with her.
Mm.
And they don't want that. And then Lal is like, okay, I'll come with you once I've learned everything I can on the Enterprise. And they don't want that either. It's like Starfleet is very, we want our way or nothing. And they're showing all of these reasonable compromises.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if we only see the Enterprise. Is the Enterprise the only ship that does this? Or every other ship in the fleet, every week somebody's threatening to quit over this or the coffee, like I said. It's just, I mean, if that's true, then I can understand Starfleet being the parent that's like, this is the hard line. You're going to do what I say. This is the rule.
Because it's the Enterprise, it's doubly silly, because the Enterprise has literally been created to have your family with you. Like, that is the point of the Enterprise D.
Right, yeah.
So, this whole argument of, what will happen if you go into battle with the Romulans, and it's like, 900 civilians will die?
You're human kids. What about this robot kid? Yeah.
Why is that not a bad thing?
I really do question their priorities.
I just worry sometimes.
I have to mention Spiner's performance in this episode. I mean, he's always great, but he's really great in this, and I think it's exemplified in that final scene when, if this is the custody drama that you posited earlier, this last scene is him doing the speech where he's on the stand and he's arguing for why he should be the father or allowed to continue to have custody of this kid. And because he's Data, he can't have emotion, but the way that he delivers this, passionate speech in the flat, cadence of sort of Data, but you still get it. And the words that he says about it being his duty and about how nobody can relieve him of his obligation to his child it was just great. It's a great bit of writing. It's a great bit of acting.
I was really impressed with Spiner's performance as well. And I think misremember. I don't misremember Data as over the top.
Yes.
Sometimes it can be a little hammy, and certainly Allure is super hammy, and everything that Brent Spiner did in Enterprise, or past Next Generation, when he was in Independence Day, and that was ridiculous. And so I remember that. So when I watch these quieter episodes of Data, as you say, giving a really emotional performance with no emotion, it's really impressive. I'm like, oh yeah, this is why everyone loves Data so much, and why everyone thinks that Brent Spiner is such an amazing actor. It's this stuff.
Yeah, and like a lot of people who are really good at something, they don't always know what it is exactly that they're good at. So when you so Brent Spiner always wants to put on a cowboy hat and dance around, or when you let his best friend write a Star Trek movie, you get Star Trek Nemesis. Yeah. Before we wrap up, I wanted to mention quick that, this episode, I often see it, shout-outs to it online for being really woke, because Data lets Lal choose her gender. But if you watch the rest of the episode, it's not so much in the way that it frames gender.
No.
Also, when Deanna says, this is the most important decision of your life because it will
It'll never
change everything, and you can't ever possibly change it. And it's like, well, no.
You can be a 1 or a 0, and you have to choose that and be that forever.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Yeah.
Although...
And yet, Lal has chosen her gender, and that is treated as quite real and valid, and that's cool, and no one's going, but you just picked that out on the holodeck. But yeah, I don't think this is an amazing...
I don't think
very,
it's as
very
woke as
binary.
people think it is. That's all.
Although her first choice is to be Marina Sirtis, and if you have a choice to be Marina Sirtis, always be Marina Sirtis. Yeah,
absolutely.
That would be my choice. I mean, let's be real.
I found the directing in that scene very odd because Deanna goes, "I am a female," and then she turns so that the camera can like take in her figure. And
yeah. There's
okay.
It's also that when they're going through the holodeck, like the four finalist choices, she says something about each of them except the human female, and she's just like, "I like her."
I like her. Yeah.
Like,
Right.
Yeah.
A friend for war
Whereas she's-
because they all know each other. It's like, come on, show.
And it's like, oh, hey, this human male body is going to be extremely popular with the ladies.
Right, exactly. And then
Oh.
the girl is like, I like her. She's nice looking. It's like, okay.
And like, I like that we have a very rare fembot who is not sexualized. Like, across any media, that is unusual. But come on. I wish she'd lived so we could have Data's reaction when Lal starts dating.
Yes. Well, we get a little slice of it with, what are your intentions to my daughter? Yeah.
Just think how much he'd hate Soji's Romulan boyfriend. Awkward dinner parties all the way down.
Oh my goodness. I really want like a awkward dinner party now. Like Thanksgiving or something where all of the daughters and and also like Lore and all of that side of the family.
And Soong and
everybody. Let's just bring everybody in.
The android wife he built to replace his real one.
And that little kid who wanted to be Data. And Data like said, you can be my blood brother from now on.
Yeah.
Just
great.
Everybody.
The whole Soong Maddox family. And then they fight.
Exactly. I mean, it wouldn't go well, but it would be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's only one emotion.
And they can bring Picard so that he can just face palm during the entire thing.
Yes. And Jenna standing outside the window, fogging up the glass.
Poor Jenna! Oh my goodness.
Well, as we get to the end here, was there anything you guys wanted to say that we haven't said yet about the Offspring?
I just want to shout out Picard's extremely revealing pajamas and shiny silver pillow.
Yeah. Forget JL, he's PJ. Yeah.
Was this and like the admiral's like, I hope I'm not bothering you, and he's like, I'm literally in my pajamas.
Yeah,
you're
right.
bothering me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got my tits out, mate. What do you think?
He didn't even try to hide it. It was just like, excuse me.
Yeah. Picard's naked contempt for the admiral is really on display.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a pun, but I'm going to let it stand.
I think it works all the same.
Good.
Well, last time that you were on the show, we talked about your space dads, or your space moms, your favorite captains. I believe Anika's was Janeway. And I was wondering how you think Janeway would have dealt with this situation. And I think as we, per our earlier discussion, you're probably going to have to point out what season Janeway we're talking about in this instance.
I mean, Janeway's number one priority, I guess I'll say, is, like, she collects people. She finds people and she says, you're going to be in my family now, and, here's your position in my family. And it's like Fast and the Furious. Have you guys watched the Fast and the Furious?
No, I'm curious
franchise?
to see where this is going.
Okay, so in Fast and the Furious, like the entire franchise is about there are these car thieves who go up against someone, anyone. Okay, so it's like their antagonist. In the first movie, it's a police officer who's undercover, and they're up against the FBI. They're up against the drug cartels. They're up against rival car thieves, etc., etc., etc. But by the next movie, those people that were the antagonists in last movie are in their family. They're in the car thief family now, too. That's how Janeway is. Janeway finds somebody who is, in some ways, an antagonist, and she brings them into her crew and says, you're my crew now, and we're all going to work together. And so she would fight tooth and nail way more than Picard. Like, she wouldn't even let Admiral Halftel on the ship. She would be like, no, you are not taking my android. We are jumping to warp 9 right now and go hide in a nebula, and you people calm down.
It's funny because that's sort of Data's approach to Maddox too. And so now I'm wondering, under different circumstances, would Data and Halftel have ended up BFFs?
Oh.
Yeah. And
Well, oh boy. Okay, so I was going to make a joke about how durotanium was thicker than blood or something like that, but now I want to do this instead. Data seems to be, like I said before, he's the guy who, I don't know about this guy, and then you meet him and you're like, he's the best guy ever. So, we see in Data's day that he's formed this relationship with Maddox, but I wonder if he forms a relationship with Halftel, and Data wouldn't describe it this way because he doesn't think he feels emotion, but it's almost like, going through these traumatic experiences of grief can create bonds between people. I wonder if he has a pen pal with him, too.
And as much as Halftel is not a sympathetic character, he spends hours trying to save Lal, and I think that's worth something.
Yeah. And he's clearly affected by the whole thing.
Yeah.
In that final scene.
Yeah. And as much as I also blame him for Lal's death, it seems like any strong emotion would have destroyed her eventually.
Yeah.
Like, she was doomed from the start, poor baby.
Probably. I do like how they have the literal transfer of memories and experiences that they do when they get the little forehead things, and he's sort of uploading stuff into her to make her net more complex. And it's just, it's that sci-fi allegory of a parent, sharing their experiences and things like that.
Yeah.
But, so we've reached the end of the show. You'll both receive a promotion from ensign to the rank of lieutenant junior grade. And we discussed which departments on the ship that you worked in previously. Anika, I believe, was a counselor in the counseling department. How would you counsel an android? If Troy had gotten a chance to sit Lal down and talk a little bit, how would you have handled that situation?
See, I wouldn't treat her any differently from a human or a Vulcan or a Andorian.
Sure.
I would, I would read up on their culture so that I would know not to do certain things for, say, an Andorian. I can imagine myself getting in trouble with that. But I think that the important thing in any counseling situation is to treat the person like their experience is completely valid.
Yeah.
And this is a place to just talk about it. And so you wouldn't want to assume that, for example, she doesn't have emotions. You would assume that she does.
Right.
And go from that place. And so even if she's not, as we were saying about the allegory for autism, even if she's not displaying them in a way that's recognizable to me, that doesn't mean that she's not feeling them and that she's not experiencing them, or that she's not able to describe them.
Yeah.
I always like when we see Troy do her job, but I can't remember in later episodes when, say, Data gets the emotion chip, if we establish that Troy can detect android emotions.
Yeah.
But I like the fact that just as a trained professional, she doesn't need her superpowers to go, you're having a problem here. Yeah, yeah.
She can tell right away that it's a like, she doesn't know that it's a cascade of blah 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 positronics, but she knows that it's a cascade of emotion of problems. It's like she can see that.
Yeah.
It's a cascade of issues.
Liz, you, I believe, were working as an assistant to an admiral in the command division. How would you field the call to Admiral Hastel's office that the android doesn't want to give up the new android he made?
I would look at my email, and I'd get myself a cup of coffee, and then I would look at the email again, and then I would punt it on to the Admiral and go, this is not really my problem, but if you want my input, and I do tend to offer input whether it's asked for or not, you should just let the android stay. And then he would ignore me because he's clearly not a great guy to work with, and I feel like I would probably want a transfer to a less less of a jerk. Like, that's what I want in my Admiral boss. Not evil, not a jerk.
Right. Seems like slim pickings for that.
We're not going to find many of those.
It's good to have that. It's good to have that luxury in the Star Trek universe as well. If you were in the Star Wars universe and you were an assistant to a Sith Lord or something like that, it seems like there's high turnover. And I wonder if that attitude bleeds into the rest of the staff. You know, if an assistant to just a regular Moff or something. If the Moff is like, oh, I'm going to throw hot coffee in this guy's face, and then, you know, his boss comes down and goes, no, that's just like Kylo Ren's thing. You can't. We've got a shortage of manpower here.
Yeah, this reminds me that I really just want a Star Wars sequel spin-off that's a workplace comedy about Kylo Ren's personal assistant and the trauma they go through every day at work. Adam Driver doesn't have to be in it. We don't need to see Kylo Ren. I just want the shenanigans.
See, now, God dang it, there is a, Detours, that's it. There is a unpublished Star Wars show called Star Wars Detours that was an animated comedy show in the style of Your Robot Chickens. I think it was actually produced by Seth Green. That has not come out. It was before the sale happened and before the whole plan to make the sequels was sort of fashioned. They were going to do this, and then when the sequels were in the mix, they were like, well, this isn't what we want for our brand. But it's like this whole goofy sort of thing, which probably would have featured some scenes like you're describing.
Oh, man!
Yeah!
In the Certain Point of View Star Wars book, it's like an anthology of short stories. There is one that is absolutely hilarious, and it's the memo that the guy that Vader chokes in A New Hope. He writes a memo to Human Resources.
That was written by Daniel Mallory Ortberg, wasn't it?
I don't remember.
I don't think I've read the whole book, but I definitely read that story.
I'm just saying, there's a lot of workplace comedy that is, we can put into both Star Wars and Star Trek. It is there. We can make it happen.
And if CBS wants to do a sitcom, they should give me a call. I have ideas.
Maybe that's what Lower Decks is.
It must be, right?
I mean,
it has to be something along those lines.
But it's definitely about people who are underlings.
Yeah. Well, let's hope they land it.
Fingers crossed.
It's tough, and I'm sure that Detours sucks, but and that's another reason that they never released it. But yeah, it's really hard to hit that exact point between parody and sort of comedy. And now we're talking about Star Wars, and you guys have ruined my show. So let's wrap it up.
You brought enough.
I did. I absolutely
surprisingly, I wasn't the one.
No.
Well, Lieutenants Dane and Barr, thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can, at EISTPod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
We're at Antimatterpod, all one word, on Tumblr. On Twitter, and Antimatterpod, all one word, .tumblr.com. I can be found at _LizBarr, all one word, at Twitter, and squidishly.net. Anika?
I can be found at @ManicPixieDane on Twitter or at manicpixiedust.com. And if you do like Star Wars, I also have a Star Wars podcast called Brea and Leia.
Oh, yeah.
Where can people find Brea and Leia?
Brea and Leia is on Twitter at Brea and Leia, which is BREHANLEIA, or BreaandLeia.live.
I'm eligible for Best Fan Writer in the Hugo Awards for my Star Trek blogging in 2019.
Oh.
I have no illusions that I could win, but I'd really like to get more than one nomination.
Sure, and people could go... Where do people go for that?
I'm not 100% sure, but if you're a member of the this year's Worldcon, which is being held in New Zealand, then you are eligible to nominate.
All right, great. Well, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
We are signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.
Your Honor, a courtroom is a crucible. In it we burn away irrelevancies until we are left with a pure product, the truth, for all time.
Oh man, this is so intense. Data is on trial for his life.
I know. This episode, The Measure of a Man, is based on the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision of 1857.
And every week on Backtracking, we take a look at the real-world events that inspired classic Star Trek episodes. Sorry.
Shut up! Who are you?
We're the hosts of Backtracking. I'm Caliban.
You will both be taken to the brig and from there to the nearest starbase, where you will answer charges for what you have done.
And I'm Gooey Fame.
This is not a game. This is life and death.
You can follow us on Twitter.
Backtracking is available wherever you listen to podcasts.
You go f*** yourself.